Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles, back with another gathering here of our proud, plucky patriots of the Hopium community. This is a weekly get together, and some of you will be watching it. Many you're watching live, some of you will be watching recording on Substack or on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And I just want to say welcome, welcome, welcome to all of you, however you're connecting with this discussion tonight. Listen, what I try to do in these get-togethers every week is I'm just going to play with my mic here for 1 second. Um, Sorry, it's got a little bit of a noise in it. What I try to do here every week is just sort of level set, take a step back from the day-to-day news and sort of assess where we are in this grand battle against Trump and MAGA. And I think that objectively, we've had a really good last month. And we need to take the wins, celebrate them when they come, and acknowledge and understand why and to build on that for future, to get more wins, to grow the circle of defiance. If you look back over the last month, let's look what's happened. Let's review the things that have happened, because I think many of these things are things that we've all wanted, that we've all fought for, that we've all spent our times doing our postcards and canvassing and info warring and making calls and texting and all the things that we do to try to weaken Trump. Because whatever your scenario is for how we get to the other side of this terrible period in our history, it has to start with him weakening. And that process has begun. We had the Senate, his own Senate, just a month ago, voted to repeal his tariffs. It was an incredible rebuke of his central domestic policy by the United States Senate. 4 Republicans joined the Democrats to pass three votes, clear repudiation of this destructive policy. We then had the amazing elections that were, well, I should say, we also had the shutdown. And the shutdown, while the shutdown may not have ended the way that we all wanted, perhaps prematurely, perhaps with adequate sort of explanation for why we were folding our tent and going in with the Republicans. We now know from polling that the shutdown was very successful for us politically. Trump declined significantly during the shutdown. Some polls have it 4 points, 5 points, some have much more. That's a huge shift for him in a short period of time. And in part because his response to the shutdown was so insane, where he threatened to starve Americans to get a deal and cut SNAP benefits. He announced that he was he started tearing down the East Wing during the shutdown and to build his gilded ballroom. He refused to negotiate with the Democrats while he was negotiating with the Syrian president and Saudi Arabia and everybody else on the planet. Russia, it turns out, the Russian envoy came to Miami and met with administration officials during the shutdown. So he negotiated with everybody else, but not with the people who have a constitutional responsibility to do the right thing for the American people. And so I think his wild reaction to the shutdown further confirmed our basic arguments about him, which is that he's in it for himself and not for us, and that has utter disregard for our democracy. And so wherever you came down on whether or not what the Gang of Eight did was right or wrong, net net, this was a wildly successful political strategy for us, led by Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. It did enormous damage to Trump, and it contributed significantly to our huge election victories just 2 weeks ago, where we had these enormous margins and a blue wave washed all across the country. As somebody who has been in elections and politics for over 30 years, in every single election cycle going back to 1992, I can't tell you how enormous the margins were and how big the victories were that we had. I mean, we not only saw these huge margins in New Jersey and Virginia with Spanberger and Sherrill, up in the way into the double digits, but we won by more than 20 points in California and Pennsylvania and in Georgia and in Maine. way beyond what anybody thought we were going to get in those races. And so we just had an unbelievably successful election that was a clear repudiation of Trump and his rancid politics. And that's something that we all needed. And I want everyone to realize is that it was more successful than anybody could have possibly imagined. And we know from history that when these off-year elections break hard against one of the two parties, the midterm elections often break in the same direction. Not always, right? This is part of what happened in 2022. There was no red wave, so things can change. But we should be very optimistic that we're in a political dynamic that is a time of opportunity for us. And then we just had what happened this week, where, there essentially was a unanimous vote to force Trump, right? This vote was to release the Epstein files because he would not release them, right? So the entire Congress, all with the exception of one House member, just voted to essentially rebuke the president again because he and Pam Bondi have been holding on to these documents. And part of what made this whole thing was so successful was that the Oversight Committee and Robert Garcia, who is, I'm hoping to be able to interview this week to get a sort of retrospective on what happened. This subpoena that happened that we were able to get with Republicans back in July is what created the release of the emails last week, where Donald Trump was implicated directly in all of these activities by Jeffrey Epstein himself in emails provided by his own estate. We also learned that Jeffrey Epstein believed he had compromising material on Trump, which is something that he could have been shopping and sharing with other people. We also know that Jeffrey Epstein said that he worked directly with the Kremlin and had direct relations with the Kremlin. And we know that Jeffrey Epstein laundered money through sanctioned Russian banks. And so what happened last week, last Wednesday, with the release of the Epstein emails and all the other materials, was another Democratic success. This is something that we did. It isn't something that happened. It's something that the Oversight Committee created last week, and that's part of what created this huge stampede, where Donald Trump had this remarkable, historic, extraordinary rebuke yesterday by both chambers of the House and the House and the Senate. And so when we look back at this period, and I know that not everybody is exactly happy the way the Democrats operated during all this. This has been a wildly successful run for us. We are strong and he is weak. We're winning and he's losing. We're succeeding, he's failing. We're the heroes here, he's the villain. We stood up for the American people in healthcare and the Epstein files and all things. We actually did, if you think prices are too high, well, the Democrats just got the Senate to repeal the tariffs that are causing the prices to be high, right? Like, we're being deeply responsive to the concerns of the American people and fighting on their behalf on issue after issue. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to do over the last month. And I think that it's really important for people who, I think, after a year of being so down and beaten and worried and concerned and feeling like, how could we be losing to this guy? Well, we're not losing to this guy anymore, right? They're losing to us. And we need to change our understanding of our politics. As I've talked to you about, and so what I've talked to you about is that in polling, we've seen in the ways that we measure the relative health of the two parties, what's called party ID and the generic ballot, which is, are you going to vote Democrat or Republican for Congress? We've seen, in the generic ballot, we've seen at least an 8-point shift now since a year ago towards the Democrats. In party ID in the Gallup quarterly track, we've gained 12 points, which means that basically the entire election has shifted between 8 and 12 points towards us. And what that means is that states and districts that were +8, +10, +12 Trump a year ago now could be competitive for us. It's a huge change, right? And so what's the evidence of that, Simon? Well, one is the performance in the election, but the second is we've seen polling now in places like Alaska and Iowa and Ohio, in Texas, where our candidates are competitive in states that Trump won by double digits. So you can see that shifting of the entire landscape of the election to be now in a place where places that were +10 Trump a year ago are now competitive. It doesn't mean we're going to win, but we are competitive now in the Alaska Senate race if Mary Patola gets in. Our gubernatorial candidate in Iowa has been ahead in recent polling in Iowa, a very red state. Sherrod Brown has been ahead in the two polls that have been taken in Ohio. Janet Mills has been ahead in the only public poll that we've had recently, independent public poll in Maine. Roy Cooper just had a poll in North Carolina showing him up 8 points in North Carolina in that critical win that we need. In Texas, we've now had several polls showing our candidates, our two candidates for the Senate, competitive in the Senate races in Texas. And so we're now in a cycle of opportunity as Democrats, and we should be excited about what it is that we can do together. I think the final thing I'll say about the polling is that not only has Trump come way down and he's now polling regularly in the 30s on his approval and in the 60s in disapproval, which is really bad, by the way, really, really bad. That means that 60% plus of the country disapproves of him. We saw in the Navigator polling last week that 16% of people that voted for Trump now regret that vote and regret voting for him. He's come way down. His agenda is even more unpopular than he is. But something very significant has happened, which is that it's the decline that is now showing up in polling on the right. So we know from our talks together that the Republican Party spends a lot of money pumping polls into the system that make things look better for them than the independent public polling. This started in 2022. It continues. There's I call it red wave pollsters is the term I use. And a bunch of those pollsters were showing polls of Trump as late as the late summer and early fall of him being, at 6 points in approval rating, 52-46, while all these other polls were having him down by 15 points. And so there was a series of these polls that showed that Trump was still fine. And so if you were a Republican, you could say, look, he's our guy. And, the polling, Trump says inflation's come down and the economy is strong and the polling is holding. And then those numbers get recycled through the right wing, propaganda noise machine. And so in the right, there was this sense that things were fine, that in our polling, things were fine. And yes, in that left wing legacy media polling, Trump was terrible, but they're always mean to Trump anyway. So who cares, right? And so that sense that things were fine was critical for Trump holding a very narrow congressional majority and keeping his team together, basically, right? Because they told themselves this false story that things were fine. But starting in October, those polls started shifting. And I went back and looked at this. And one of the examples and you started seeing some of them being not fine or not so fine, a little bit less than fine, but not necessarily bad. And then you had this incredible incident that happened in New Jersey where 7 Republican pollsters had the Jack Ciattarelli, Mikey Sherrill race of these red wave pollsters had the race dead even going into election day, and she won by 13 points. So they were off by more than 10 points, which if you're doing legitimate polling, you can't really be off by 10 points. You can't be off by that much if they're actually legitimate, serious polls. And the fact that all of them were off by about the same amount sort of exposed the game here, and that they do flood the zone with fake polling to sort of push to make their candidate stronger and ours weaker. And they've been doing it with Trump. And the problem is now is that a lot of these guys were embarrassed by this and they've started adjusting their national sample. And so even in Republican polling now, he is in decline. Emerson went from -3 to -8, right after the election. But a Republican pollster named Signal, which is the pollsters for the House Republicans, issued a report on Friday in their monthly tracking poll that things were moving so hard against the Republicans that the midterms were in danger. This was a very direct, like, we're in the shitter here, guys, and if we don't course correct, we're going to get blown out in the election next year. Very kind of honest talk. We then saw another memo that came out a couple days ago from McLaughlin, who's one of Trump's pollsters, saying that in the House races, if the Republicans didn't restore the ACA cuts, that they were going to get blown out in the midterms. That came from Trump's own pollster, public document that they released. Third is that today, a firm called Echelon, which is a very respected Republican polling firm, showed Trump dropping 8 points in the last month and was now down at 42.57. So in on the right, they now are seeing him being in trouble. The illusion of his strength has been pierced by all of this polling and by the adjustments that have been happening and the embarrassment of the election. And now in right-wing polling circles, there's now sort of honest talk that Donald Trump is an enormous albatross and a liability for them. And they're using euphemism, right? They're not saying this so directly, but they are using words like warning and things that are in their world are words and things that they're saying that would have been unimaginable 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. And you've even seen one of their main pollsters tip go from Trump being, only at 45, 46 to now being, minus 10, huge 10-point shift just in the last couple of months. This really matters in this city of Washington. Part of my job here and what makes me different from a lot of the other people on Substack and the commentators that you follow is that I've been in this business full time for the last 30 plus years, working in politics and elections and legislation and being in the Capitol, working with everyone here. And I can tell you that when this kind of polling is sort of so universally bad, they understand that Trump is a big problem for them. And all these young elected officials all across the country who are Republicans who want to run and win their elections in 2026 are seeing this polling and they're getting scared and they're beginning to realize that Trump is a significant liability for them. And what that does is that weakens his hold on the party. He becomes not the strong leader, but a weak leader. He didn't lead them into battle. He didn't campaign for any of these candidates that ran anywhere across the country in 2024, 26, 25. He was absent. He didn't spend any of the hundreds of millions of dollars that he has as a political committee in any of these. He just let these guys. And I will tell you that that was a huge political mistake by the White House in terms of retaining the control and the fealty of the Republicans that he needs all across the country. And so what happens is that all of that anger and frustration at him and the sense that he's letting them down and that he's weakening, because he is literally weakening, he's in political, physical, and cognitive decline. There's no way to get around that. Is that, you had this explosion of support. I mean, this explosion of opposition to him yesterday that just exploded across the Capitol in ways that, I mean, who could have believed that every Republican except one voted against Donald Trump in the House yesterday? Because remember, this was a vote against him. This vote had to happen because he was holding back these documents after promising to release them. This was not a vote for releasing the Epstein files. This was a huge fuck you to Donald Trump by every Republican in Congress yesterday, except for one. It's an unimaginable thing that just happened. And so we have to recognize that he is a dramatically weakened figure. He is incredibly unpopular. His agenda is even more so. And as I've talked about, the next phase, there's two things that are going to happen next as we plan ahead. One is that they still have to pass a fiscal year 2026 budget, and they still are going to need 7 Democratic votes to do that, unless they decide to get rid of the filibuster, which John Thune has told Trump he's not going to do, which means that we have to go through all these negotiations all over again about what we're going to support. Or the government shuts down on January 30th again, or the government just runs out of money because the continuing resolution ends. So we need to be pushing our Democrats in the House and the Senate to have greater ambition to get as much as possible in these negotiations as we can, because they're weak and we're strong, and we have to sort of recalibrate our asks based on how the ground has shifted and that we're now in we're in a far stronger position. And so one of the things we're doing at Hopium is we're calling our House and Senate members and demanding that they follow this agenda that we've laid out that asks for them to roll back the tariffs and to fix our healthcare system in America, the things that have been broken, to stop the increased funding of ICE, to stand with Europe and Ukraine and not with Russia, as Donald Trump did today. He stood with Putin side by side, figuratively today, where he once again put forward a peace plan that was essentially total Ukrainian capitulation. We have to push our electeds to go and negotiate with everything they got in the coming months. But the second thing that's going to happen simultaneously to this is that every city council and county council and state legislature and every politician in the country in the states is going to come back in January, and they're going to have to deal with the reckoning of this terrible government. They're going to have to deal with a broken healthcare system. They're going to have to deal with SNAP benefits being cut. They're going to have to deal with the slower economy, which means that they have less revenue, and that means they're going to have to cut. They're going to have to deal with higher unemployment rates and all the things that Donald Trump has done with the ICE, the menace of ICE, and this domestic political police force that Trump has created. And this debate about what to do, because they have to budget against this. They have to budget now against the Medicaid cuts and the SNAP cuts that are coming next year. This isn't something that's going to happen later. And so the whole country is about to have a huge debate. Every government in the United States is going to be having a debate about the harms and that Donald Trump and the Republicans have done to the country. This is a huge problem for them. And this is why what I'm saying is that as bad as things are now for Trump and the Republicans, they're going to get worse in the next few months as every local jurisdiction and every local newspaper and every local media outlet is Democrats saying, look at the harm that he's done to us. Look at what we have to do now. Look how hard it's going to be to take care of our citizens when the economy is slowing down and we're going to have less revenue. And we're not going to let them starve, and we're not going to let them lose their health insurance, and we're not going to let the tariffs continue to raise prices on everybody. We're not going to let our farmers and small businesses continue to be pummeled by this administration, because their strategy is more for me and less for all of you, right? A modern day version of let them eat cake. And so that's going to make things worse for them. And that's why we need to be, and then finally, the third piece about the next piece, what happens next. I wrote an essay this week about why it's so critical that we fund our parties and our candidates now. And the reason why is because the Republicans and Donald Trump we can't wait to the spring and summer of next year. People need to get off the sidelines now. Why? Because Donald Trump, they know they're in trouble. And one of the things that's going to happen is that what happened in 2024, and one of the reasons we lost the election, is that our campaign started a little late in 2024, and then the Biden debate performance happened. And in that period, early in the year, Trump was able to, through his campaign and through their spending, was able to sort of restore was able to win sort of and set the terms of the debate a little bit in 2024, because we weren't spending money nationally in these elections. We need to learn from that mistake this time, and we need to be competing 24/7, 365 all across the country every day. And the stronger our political part, the earlier that we get everybody money, the more they can hire staff, the more they can be aggressive in contesting all of this on the ground. And we cannot concede the national discourse, because they have a lot of money. Donald Trump has raised incredible amounts of money through corrupt and illicit means since he's been president. And they're not going to just sit here idly by while he melts down across the country. At some point, we're going to see significant political attacks on us and efforts to restore his standing. We've already begun to see it, right? They went all over the TV shows last weekend claiming that inflation was down. They're already lying, right? My assumption is that by the middle of January, they're going to be, $50, $100 million worth of ads all across the country, echoing those same basic themes to try to restore him. We need to anticipate this. And part of my challenge to all of you is that the earlier candidates and party committees get resources. We heard Charlie Dingman talk about this. We've heard Anderson Clayton talk about this just in the last few weeks, that when you get the money early, you hire staff, you beef up, you can do much more. And it means that you're far more likely to, first of all, be successful in the information game every day, but also means you've got experienced people working for you by the time the summer and fall come around next year. This model that we have where people get late money and start hiring staff in June or July is insane. It is far less likely for us to win than for us to hire staff now that by the time the election comes around, they're experienced. They've gotten, they've learned their way around in all the ways that we learn our way around. So part of my challenge to all of you is that whatever resources you're planning on spending this cycle, don't hold stuff to summer and fall of next year. We need to invest early because the Republicans are going to try to escape where they are now. And we've got them on the run, and we can't let them escape. We need to define them now and all the harms that they've done to the American people. So there is no possibility that they can restore their standing before the election. We need to be engaged now, 24/7, 365, on offense while they're weak and we're strong. And we can't let them, like Houdini, get out of this where they are now. We have to be smart about this. And it's why I'm going to be pushing really hard our community to be providing resources and volunteer time for our party committees and our candidates now and not wait till next year because we need to be fighting now. Part of the reason, the Cook Report did an analysis about why we did so much better in the Senate races in 2024 than we did in the presidential in many of those battleground states. And their conclusion was the Senate majority PAC went up early, defined their opponents early, and they never were able to recover. Well, we got Trump down now, and we got to knock him out. I mean, that's got to be what we have to do together. We got to knock these guys out and not let them get back up from off the mat from where they are now. It's something that's possible. I mean, in 1990, the presidential election where we won by the biggest margin in the recent years was Clinton's reelection in 1996. He won by 8.5 points. We went up in that election in the fall of 1995 with ads defining Dole in the fall of 1995, and Dole was never able to recover from those ads. And so going up early is really important in this cycle in particular, because they're going to have a lot more money than they've had in recent years. Donald Trump has been, taking essentially massive bribes and selling pardons and doing all the things, and it's been going into his political committees in order to try to preserve the House and the Senate next year so he doesn't get impeached or get investigated, all the things that he knows is going to happen. Many of you have said, well, Trump is going to, rig the elections. Well, oh, by the way, on the list of success stories, the whole redistricting thing is completely backfired on them, right? We can talk more about that. Another incredible success story. Thank you, Texas Democrats. Thank you, Gavin Newsom. Thank you, JB Pritzker, for fighting and lifting us off the map this summer. This was critical. When you look at our success and how we got here, the fight that began, that those three, the Texas Democrats, JB Pritzker and Gavin Newsom, led for us this summer was really the beginning of our revival as a political party. And they deserve a lot of credit for having gotten us to this place. And I'm sorry I didn't mention that. But I think just to end here is that, we've had a great few weeks, everybody, right? I mean, we did what we needed to do here. But of course, we have a lot more to do. And when you are winning and you've got momentum, you have to keep it moving. You've got to keep it going. We can't disengage now. We have to stay in the fight because we're winning, they're losing, we're strong, they're weak, we're successful, they're failing. We are the heroes here. They're the villains. Donald Trump these days, as I like to say, is a big blubbery baby man and anything but a strong man. And we have to also, but what that means in your networks, in your conversations, in the Thanksgiving dinner tables, what I want to challenge all of you to think is to not accept the narrative that we are weak and they are strong, because it's no longer true after what's happened over the last month. And we should be fighting that out, making those arguments. And I'll end with this one piece of data today, right? In the generic ballot, are you going to vote Democrat or Republican next year? I said that, we've seen about an 8-point shift. Well, in many polls taken in recent weeks, it was much bigger than that. But in the average, it's been about 8. And the way that data moves when things are moving, you get a few outliers at the upper end of the band, and then the whole band starts to shift sometimes, right? So we've had now a few polls showing us now with much bigger gains in the generic ballot, places that would indicate a blue wave, similar to what we saw in the election. Very promising data for us. Today, the Marist and NPR PBS poll, which is a very credible and high quality poll, had us up by 14 points in the generic ballot. The goal was to get to 7 or 8 in the generic ballot. We were up 14. Now, no one else has had us up in double digits in the generic ballot. Is this an outlier or is it a harbinger, right? Has Trump, because of the Epstein files and because of the election loss and because of the terrible economy and because of selling out of Ukraine to to Russia, is he starting to go through some kind of structural collapse that we haven't totally caught yet in polling? Because this Epstein stuff is still very recent and we don't yet know how it's going to cycle through. But today we had a poll that showed, if you look at Hopium today, like the Democratic thing is way up, the Republican thing is way down. And so just my advice to you as we go forward is that let's take the wins and celebrate the wins, everybody. We've had a really good month here. We've done what we needed to do, which is we've weakened him and we've started restoring the strength of the Democratic Party. Is it sufficient? Is it enough? Of course not. Anything can happen in our politics. Tomorrow is a new day. But right now, we're in a far stronger position than we were, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, a year ago against Trump. And we should own that and understand that that we have done really important work together. And of course, we have much more to do over the next year. I've laid out some of the things that I think we need to be working on. But I want to say congratulations, everybody. Like, we just have to allow ourselves to acknowledge that this has been really successful and that we have done really good here. And I'm really proud to be in this fight with all of you and excited to get to questions now. Thanks, everybody.